should you buy Baldur's Gate 3 in 2025? As most of you already know, Baldur's Gate 3 is the critically acclaimed Game of the Year winner and RPG that was released back in 2023. I purchased the game for myself at the very start of 2024 and finally got around to playing it in December. And man, do I regret not playing this absolute masterpiece sooner. I've never played a game quite like this one, with the absolute diversity and variability in choices that have real story and gameplay impacts, and a gameplay system filled with explosiveness and strategy in every encounter. The game did take a while to get used to, and it is definitely complex in its plethora of gameplay mechanics and systems that takes time to get accustomed to. However, once you do, it's one hell of a journey. Today, I want to answer the question of whether this game is worth buying in 2025, of course without any spoilers, thus meaning that the footage will mainly consist of trailers and early footage of the game. First, starting with the presentation of this game, as you can probably tell through the footage, this game looks truly unreal. The game's vistas and various environments, of which the most beautiful I won't show off for spoiler reasons, are incredibly well detailed and developed with an innate sense of passion you can feel in every crevice and corner that you explore. Baldur's Gate 3's presentational value is one of its greatest aspects, and it holds to be a great way to get into this seemingly daunting genre of CRPGs. It is not only the environments and locations that will blow you away in their diversity and look, but the various NPCs and even the menu systems, the clothing pieces, weapons, and anything in terms of the game's aesthetic is so fine-tuned to fit into this world. I've longed for a great fantasy game that has an intense and overflowing sense of great world building and allure, and Baldur's Gate 3 has fulfilled every sensation that I was looking for. The animations are all great as well, from the combat to the facial animations and the interactions you have with the hundreds of individuals you will meet in your journey. Sure, when you really get down to scrutinizing the facial animations, for example, they're not as jarringly good as something like Rockstar's greatest, but they're well beyond the scope of 95% of other AAA developers, and adds to the immersion of your journey and the nuance of interactions you may have with the companions and people roaming about in this great landscape. Thus, as is probably evident from my rambling in the last couple of minutes, Baldur's Gate 3 truly does not falter in any capacity in terms of its presentation, and I was consistently thrilled by the scope and beauty of the world I was enveloped in for my entire 85+ hour journey through this captivating universe. Now, this part is one of my favorite aspects of the game, if not my favorite. Of course, there'll be no spoilers in this section, and I'll just give a little brief overview of what the story entails and my general thoughts on the construction of the characters and the overall writing presented throughout this game. To start off, despite absolutely loving this story, the characters, and the world, I wouldn't say, in my personal opinion, that Baldur's Gate 3 has a story as well written or interesting as some of the best story-driven games out there like Red Dead Redemption 2. However, in spite of that, the story here is so well done due to the fact that it really is shaped by the choices and decisions that you make throughout the game. No other game I have ever played, even with some of my favorites synonymous with this sort of impact like the Mass Effect trilogy, truly has such a high level of reactivity in how its story may be course corrected by the player. You truly are playing the role of your character in an authentic way, and every interaction you have with your companions or with others inhabiting this world will directly feed into how the story will direct itself. It is a game like no other, in which everything you have ever done in this world is reflected in how the story and the individual character arcs will present themselves. Although my discussion would be better developed with some examples, there is of course not going to be any spoilers, but what I will say is that the story of Baldur's Gate 3 is utterly fantastic, in large part due to the fact that it almost feels like you, the players, are shaping the story. Every playthrough would be different in some aspect, as the story in each one would not follow the same strokes every time. Rather, the choices and decisions you make will define how the story you see is different to that of all other players. I wrapped up my first playthrough and went straight into the second, and I can tell you now that 90% of how the story has progressed so far in this playthrough is so distinctly adverse and contrasting to what I experienced in my first playthrough, due to my own discoveries or through the varying choices that I made that made the story flow in a different direction. A game with a story like this is truly uncommon, and it truly feels like a grand fantasy adventure where your character is truly the center of it all, wielding the balance of the game's world in your grasp. And whether you choose to play out this fantasy as a hero or as a villain, the story of Baldur's Gate 3 will continuously change in accordance with who your character and your companions develop to be, and how their actions have a wider impact on the people and the world that they interact with. Now moving on to the gameplay. I have never played a CRPG before. I purchased the game first on PC, but didn't really play it much and ended up trying it on PS5. There was no particular reason for this, as I just felt like trying it on a console, and man, did it take some time to get used to the gameplay systems of Baldur's Gate 3. If you've never played a game like this, like myself, from what I know, it is based on a particular D&D rule set, and so many of the game's mechanics, such as the dice rolling, attack chances, and even down to the classes and skills, are derived from that particular edition of D&D. I've never played D&D, so this was all very foreign to me, but luckily the plethora of the in-game tutorials when you approach certain mechanics or thresholds do so well to explain you into it and help you understand how exactly this game is supposed to or can be played. The game's gameplay will mainly center around combat in addition to exploration, which I'll discuss a little later in the next section, and so I think delving into what makes the gameplay here so interesting and fun would start with the combat. The game's combat system is turn-based, so you and your allies will have your turns and the enemies will have theirs, with the order of this really depending on certain skills you have, whether you approach the enemy head-on or snuck up to them, and a variety of other factors that are beyond my understanding, to be honest. Within combat, you can control the actions of your own character and that of your companions or your party, with a limited movable distance and action that you must balance and strategize with effectively in order to win your battles. It does surely take time to get used to this, and I highly recommend that you quick save the game every 15 minutes or so in order to not lose out significantly if anything goes drastically wrong in the game's combat encounters. In your turn, an action will allow you to attack an enemy with a spell, your weapon of choice, or simply dash or throw something at the enemy. You also have a bonus action which may be used in combat to jump, for example, or to use a healing potion or any other items that you may have. Moving around the battlefield and especially getting the high ground is super important, as this will increase your chance of actually hitting an enemy due to you having an advantage over them with your high ground. Positioning in this game's combat system is so utterly important to win, and it does take time to get used to understanding whether you should sneak up on an enemy for the advantage hit or how you should position certain party members in order to get the advantage when the fight begins. You can really approach every combat encounter in any way that you would like. I've had some tough fights, especially in my first run through of the game, and using an oil barrel and exploding it in the middle of a battle has been a saving grace often used by myself, even if I may lose out on some loot. But you literally can do these encounters in any way possible. If you want to push an enemy near a cliff into the chasm, go for it. If you wanted to put an enemy to sleep and then pickpocket them rather than kill them, go for it. If you wanted to set up a line of oil barrels while invisible and then stand back and explode them all in succession, go for that too. And that's really my favorite part of the combat here, the fact that you can do all these encounters in any way possible, which keeps the combat consistently engaging, which is of course super important for a game like this. And once you've invested enough time, you'll get used to all the systems and have an absolute blast with the game like I did. Now for the game's world and exploration. The game's world is utterly fantastic and truly has the essence of a grand fantasy adventure. All of the game's locations are so distinct and well detailed, wielding secrets and treasures in every corner. The game is split into 3 separate acts, with each act having its own variety of gargantuan and well-tailored locations that you are free to explore and look around in. There are things in my first playthrough that I missed, but have found by exploring further in different parts of Act 1, which is really just reflective of how massive this game's world and scope truly is. However, despite the utter scope of the locations and the variety within those locations, it is all well fitted with detail in every corner, as searching around may see you find a secret area or bunker, a new treasure, or even new enemies and people to interact with. There is so much life and beauty in the world of Baldur's Gate 3, and it is obvious that the world was crafted with an unmatched sense of passion and love by the creators at Larian Studios. As for exploration, this of course goes hand in hand with the incredible world that Larian has so excellently built, as you really are not limited in any capacity when it comes to exploration. Just as in combat, you may engage every encounter in any possible way, with the only limitation being your creativity, the same can definitely be said for the game's exploration aspect. You may use all the tools at your disposal and your own abilities such as jumping and teleporting in order to get around to areas that seem like they aren't accessible. This really adds to the essence of a grand journey in Baldur's Gate 3, because it feels as if nothing is off limits and that the world is truly your oyster. There is much more I could ramble on about in terms of the world and exploration of Baldur's Gate 3, especially in regard to its superb world building of this great fantasy scope that has been developed here. But without spoilers, again, it is hard to delve into the specifics. It truly is a game you need to explore and find for yourself, as a large part of the journey is finding all the secrets and treasures that await you in Baldur's Gate 3. I think my final verdict is quite obvious, but I absolutely believe you should buy this game in 2025. Any problems such as bugs that might have plagued the game at the game's launch have all been ironed out, and the game is entirely smooth to play from start to finish. It truly is a generation-defining game and has set the standard as for what players can expect from truly passionate and hard-working AAA developers. The game is currently on sale on Steam and various other platforms such as PlayStation and Xbox, and so I highly recommend you pick the game up if you're interested. Anyway, I hope you all did enjoy today's video. If you want to see more content like this, consider subbing to the channel and dropping a like, and I'll see you all in the next one. Peace.